3 experienced lighthouse keepers vanished from a remote Scottish island overnight. No bodies, no witnesses, no explanation. One man's coat was still hanging on the wall. The kind of coat you would never leave behind in a storm that violent. Welcome to Drawn to Crime, where real mysteries unfold through animation. In this episode, we cover the Flannan Isles Lighthouse mystery, the disappearance that has haunted Scotland for over 120 years, and the one that nobody, not then, not now, has ever been able to explain. I want you to picture the most isolated place you can imagine. A tiny cluster of islands 20 miles off the Scottish coast, in the middle of the North Atlantic. No permanent residence, no shelter, just black rock cliffs, seabirds, and one lighthouse standing against the ocean. 3 men lived there, rotating shifts, weeks at a time, completely cut off from the mainland. Their job was to keep the light burning so ships didn't sink on the rocks below. James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, Donald MacArthur. Experienced keepers, men who knew the sea, men who had done this before. On the 15th of December, 1900, a relief ship arrived at the Flannan Isles to rotate the crew. The lighthouse was dark. The relief keeper went ashore, called out, no answer. He climbed to the lighthouse. The door was unlocked. He went inside. Nobody was there. 3 men, vanished from a rock in the middle of the ocean, with nowhere to go. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse had only been operational for a year when the 3 keepers disappeared. It was built on Eileen Moor, the largest of the Flannan Isles, a remote, treacherous location chosen specifically because of how many ships had been lost on those rocks. James Ducat was the principal keeper, experienced, dependable, 40 years old. Thomas Marshall was his assistant, younger, capable. Donald MacArthur was a substitute keeper, brought in to cover for another man who was ill. 3 men who knew the job, who understood isolation, who had no reason to leave and nowhere to go if they had wanted to. The last log entry from the lighthouse was dated the 15th of December, 1900. The light had been reported as unlit by a passing ship 2 days earlier, the 15th of December, which meant that whatever happened on or before that date. In the middle of a North Atlantic winter, on an island 20 miles from the nearest coast. In the dark. When the relief keeper Joseph Moore went inside the lighthouse, what he found was deeply unsettling. The last meal had been prepared but not eaten. 2 chairs were pushed back from the table, as though the men had stood up suddenly and left mid-meal. 1 chair was knocked over entirely. The clock on the wall had stopped. On the table, the logbook was open, and the final entries made by Thomas Marshall told a story that investigators found deeply troubling. The 12th of December, Marshall wrote about a severe storm. He described the men as very disturbed. He noted that James Ducat, the experienced principal keeper, a man described by everyone who knew him as calm and unshakable, had been crying. The 13th of December, another storm entry. Marshall wrote that the men had been praying. Now here's what makes those entries so strange. Weather records from the Scottish mainland for those dates show no significant storm. Ships in the area reported calm conditions. Whatever those men were experiencing on that island on the 12th and 13th of December, the rest of the world couldn't see it. The final log entry was the 15th of December. It read simply, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." And then, nothing. Investigators found one more detail that has haunted this case for over a century. Donald MacArthur's coat was still hanging on its hook by the door. In December, on a North Atlantic island, in conditions severe enough that experienced men had been writing about storms in the log for days. MacArthur was an experienced keeper. He had worked in these conditions before. He would have known. Everyone on that island would have known. that you do not step outside in a North Atlantic winter without your coat. And yet, there it was, on its hook, like he had stepped out for a moment and was coming right back. The two other keepers' coats were gone, which suggested they had gone outside, properly dressed, with some intention of returning to a specific task. And MacArthur had followed them, suddenly, without stopping for his coat. Something had made him move fast. The exterior of the lighthouse showed signs of severe wave damage. Iron railings bent, stone steps damaged, equipment moved. Whatever had hit those cliffs had been extraordinary. But no bodies were ever found. Not on the island, not washed ashore anywhere, not anywhere. 3 men, gone. The official investigation concluded that the most likely explanation was that the men had gone to secure equipment on the lower platforms during a storm and had been swept away by a rogue wave. It was a reasonable conclusion on the surface. The damage to the exterior of the lighthouse was consistent with extreme wave activity. The platforms below the lighthouse sat close to the water and would have been extremely dangerous in rough conditions. But the theory had problems that investigators acknowledged and never fully resolved. The log entries described MacArthur, the substitute keeper, as deeply distressed on the 12th and 13th. But MacArthur was known as a tough, experienced man, not someone easily unsettled. The storm described in the log didn't match any weather records from the mainland. And if 2 of the men went down to the platforms to secure equipment, why did MacArthur follow without his coat? A rogue wave scenario implies urgency, but not the kind of urgency that would make an experienced keeper run outside in December without stopping for 30 seconds to grab his coat. Unless whatever he saw happen to the other 2 men made him move without thinking. The investigation was thorough for its time, but it was 1900, no forensic tools, no way to analyze the log entries for stress indicators, no way to know what the weather had truly been doing on that island on those specific nights. The case was officially closed. The lighthouse was eventually automated. The island has been uninhabited ever since. The rogue wave theory remains the most widely accepted explanation. And honestly, it may simply be correct. The North Atlantic in December is one of the most dangerous stretches of water on Earth, and rogue waves capable of sweeping men from exposed platforms are not unheard of. But the details that don't fit have kept theorists busy for over a century. Some researchers have focused on the log entries, specifically the description of experienced men crying and praying in response to a storm that nobody else recorded. Some believe the men may have witnessed something on or around the island that terrified them deeply before whatever ultimately took them. Others have pointed to the local Gaelic folklore surrounding the Flannan Isles. The islands were considered sacred and deeply unlucky. Local fishermen refused to land on them and referred to them using specific protective phrases. The lighthouse keepers were warned by locals before taking the posting. They went anyway. There are theories involving seismic activity, underwater earthquakes capable of generating massive localized waves without a broader weather event, which would explain why mainland weather records showed nothing while the island experienced something catastrophic. And then there's the theory that focuses on the men themselves, that something happened between them on that island, that isolation, confinement, and whatever they experienced in those log entries pushed something to breaking point. But with no bodies and no witnesses, it will never be more than a theory. The Flannan Isles lighthouse still stands. It's automated now, has been for decades. No keeper has lived there since the early 20th century. The island itself is visited occasionally by birdwatchers and researchers. There is a small memorial to the 3 men: James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, Donald MacArthur. 3 men who kept the light burning so others could find their way safely through the dark, and who vanished into that same darkness without a trace. The coat is the detail I can't let go of. A man who spent his working life on the North Atlantic in winter, stepping outside in December without stopping to grab it. Something made him move without thinking. So I want to know what you think. Rogue wave? Something in those log entries that nobody has properly decoded yet? Or something else entirely that happened on that island in the dark? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this one stayed with you, you need to hear about an unidentified man found dead on an Australian beach. Every label cut from his clothing, a coded message hidden in a secret pocket, and a woman who recognized him and denied it until the day she died. That story is right here. Go watch it next.